Now we have the recording started. All right. So here we are. Again, welcome to everybody who's here with us live tonight, as well as everyone that's going to be listening to the recording. We have this webinar scheduled on the topic of the truth about peri and menopause and how to find balance again. So what we're going to be sharing with you in the next hour is the story about the truth of what women experience uh, generally these days from their mid-30s or 40 onward. What we've been told that is not the truth about what's really happening. We're going to talk about some of the choices and options that we do have. We're going to share some tips for some natural ways to deal with some of the symptoms and as well as the underlying issues. And we're going to offer some other options that are available for anybody that wants to go deeper with any of this. So that's what we've got planned for you tonight, and I'm really excited to be with all of you. So this is me, and I think almost all of you know me already. We have some guests that don't, but my name is Susan Joyce Proctor, and I have a diploma in Ayurvedic medicine. That's what that DAY means. And I've also got an MBA because I had an earlier career in business. So not everybody would guess that meeting me now that I was a vice president of a bank and have an MBA in finance, but that's also true. And for the past 30 some years, I have been a practitioner of Ayurvedic medicine, really focusing and specializing in women's wellness. And since then, I had a couple of podcasts. We have a wonderful membership community, and I'm certified in all this stuff, including a program called Management of Menopause Type that I'm going to share a little bit more about because I was passionate about finding answers for myself a number of years ago before I went through this transition, this life transition. And I did find solutions then that worked really well for me and for others. And now there's even more available. And I also want to introduce Jenny Dangerfield, who is with us tonight. Jenny is a friend and colleague and partner, and we've been working together for several years now on our Davina Rising community, on other programs we're developing, including one right now called Biohacking with Ayurveda. And we are really excited about bringing more of this material out into the world. Jenny is our creative director and responsible for a lot of the beauty of what we get to share with you, as well as a real focus on biohacking and a lot of the new tools that are available that we are translating into the language of bioindividuality that we have so much respect for. And I'm also really thrilled tonight to introduce some of you to Dr. Golda Joseph. Some of you have already met her, actually. A few weeks ago, we had a gathering at my home, and some of you were meeting her for the first time. But Jenny and I connected with Dr. Golda actually just within the past couple of months. It's a little spooky how short a time period ago that was in terms of what we've accomplished so far. But Dr. Golda has a PhD in holistic nutrition. She is the founder of a company called Regeneration. We are partnering with her, Jenny is, and Christina and myself, because we are thrilled about the work that she's done that kind of takes what I've done to another level. So we've been kind of felling together about all of this with the outcome that there's now personalized hormone support available that to me was just like a fantasy, for many years that I thought, someday when we meet our intergalactic, brethren, well, we're going to have better tools. And it turns out we have them actually on this planet right now. And Dr. Golda has been a specialist in women's healthcare and human development and so much more that I realized I couldn't even share her entire bio tonight. But like I said, Jenny and Christina and I are very excited about partnering with her and taking this wisdom out into the world in a much bigger way. Because, I've had a intention of creating a different paradigm for women's wellness globally with this material for a long time. And I feel like we finally have a team in place that we're actually going to be able to do that. So just make a little disclaimer here, like I always do, for legally and morally important, that we're not offering any medical advice here tonight at all. This is all about education and self-care. And these words at the bottom, some of you have heard me share about this before. Um, I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff tonight. And I'm going to be talking about it in three different categories that I like to call information, perspectives, and my opinion. Because there's some things that I'm going to be sharing with you that I consider information. That's stuff you can Google. Like this is real, data that is out there that you might not know about yet, but not something that I made up, in any way. That's to me different from a perspective that I might share with you. I might share a perspective that, from an Ayurvedic medicine perspective, we might look at things, this way that are different from a pharmaceutical perspective. And that's a little different to me from just, like hard information. And then that last category is just my personal opinion that I want to feel free to share with you for your consideration, but I don't want that to get confused with, like real info that you can Google and find out about out there. So there may be some times that I'm going to say this is real info and this is my opinion, and I think it's kind of good to keep it clean, which is which. So I always like to start with that. And I mentioned a couple of minutes ago about having an intention at one time, that someday more balance would be available to all of us. And I have an intention for tonight. And I invite all of you to kind of tune in for any intention that you might have, because intention's really powerful. It kind of takes us, out of just being spectators to really playing a game, and the universe responds very powerfully to our intentions. So my general intention for tonight is that you all receive some information or insight or aha that improves your life in some way, like right away, some tip or tool or something that you can take away, because I know how valuable all of our time is. So even though we're not charging for this particular program tonight, you're all spending your time and energy. And what part of my intention is that you get something out of that, because we're going to be sharing enough juicy stuff that I think I'm pretty confident that everybody's going to find something here that made it really worth their time tonight, as well as seeing what else we have to offer and, giving you an opportunity to see if there's another step that you want to take now or in the future. So I invite you to tune into any intention that might be meaningful for you, because it does very powerfully frame our experience. All right, we're going to dive in. And I want to do this in such a way that I'm not blocking the slides. So I'm starting with this one that says what women are told. And this is in the realm of information that you can find out there. If you Google menopause and are looking to see what's going on, this was one of the things that I found that you would find if you were out there looking like, gee, what is menopause? What is this whole midlife thing that's going on? And what they're telling us here is that menopause is a natural process. I agree with that. That usually happens when someone is in their 40s and 50s, but this time can vary. And what they're showing us here is that at a certain point, by the time we're around 40, that estrogen production starts to drop. And as we get older, it drops further. And they're saying that here by age 55, we have very little to no estrogen. And no matter when somebody starts or finishes, the general stages are the same. And they're describing some of the experiences here of a change in periods and different symptoms. And, menopause is when periods stop and then what happens afterward. And What I want to say about this, and this is now my opinion, is I think this is crap. So that's that's not a technical term. That's my opinion. But one of the things about it that's really crappy is all it's talking about is estrogen, which is just one hormone. It's not the only one that starts fluctuating at this time in life. And just focusing on that is so unrealistic and so deceptive that looking at this, you really wouldn't understand very much about what's going on at all. And the other thing that's really crappy about it to me is, and we have another slide, it's just talking about symptoms and bad stuff that as being kind of inevitable. And again, my opinion is that while modern medicine has some amazing things to offer, in areas where there's acute infections and trauma, I often say, if God forbid you get into a car accident, go to the emergency room. Don't come to see me, with all humility. But there's some areas that it really fails at worse than others. And to me, women's health, which has never been adequately understood because our cycles make it hard to do studies. So women have often been ignored, even from medical studies, within that paradigm. But the whole hormonal situation is not well understood at all. And so I'm offering this as an example of the crap that women have been told. And following up on that, I have another one that is also pretty crappy, maybe a little prettier, a little blurry. And again, this is just talking about, the symptoms that we might experience at different times, because that's pretty much all we've been told is that we're going to have different types of symptoms. And just to kind of clarify some of the terms, menopause is actually defined as our last period. And usually you don't know it was your last one till 12 months have gone by and you didn't get another one. So you can say, okay, I had my last period a year ago and it looks like I'm not going to have any more of them. So when somebody says they're going through menopause, it's a little bit of a misnomer. Usually when they say that they're going through perimenopause, which is this period that these days starts often as early as the mid 30s, because we have so many endocrine disruptors and other disruptors in our world that these changes start a lot sooner. And then and what's happening during perimenopause is that the body is gradually ramping down its production of the sex hormones of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone that we needed to maintain a menstrual cycle. So as we're getting to the end of our reproductive years and we don't need all those levels of hormones, the body starts to ramp that down. And that sputtering, it's one of the words I once heard that I thought was such a good descriptor. That hormone sputtering results in a lot of these symptoms that women experience. And then once we have our last period and we don't need, those levels anymore at all, uh, some of the things that nature intended in the body don't always happen, which I'm going to be describing in just a little bit. But many women have the experience of not having the levels of hormones that they need to avoid having these symptoms. And that's pretty much what the female condition is that there's certain symptoms that are going on kind of up until the last period and other ones that continue after that. And for the most part, nobody knows what to do about that because we've been somewhat misinformed about what's really going on. Because what we've been told is that our bodies stop producing hormones at menopause and that we either replace those or we suffer. And I I know that those are not the only two options. This is, I'll call that a perspective of mine. But I know that those are not the only two options, and I know that that's not true. And I've been studying this for a really long time because I went through menopause almost 20 years ago. And this was, more urgent for me at that time. And I was doing a lot of research because I believe so deeply in the concept of bioindividuality and how different we all are that, looking at this, it was like, it, everybody's different. And the way menopause was being handled didn't make any sense to me. That at that time, it was mostly like women were getting, prescriptions for hormone replacement, and everybody was getting the same prescription. And I had the excellent good fortune to discover a doctor by the name of Joseph Collins. He was a naturopath, and he wrote a book that we'll be referencing a little bit later called Discover Your Menopause Type. And this was the first of that kind of wisdom that I came across, where his story was that he was a naturopath when he wrote the book, but he said he was a nurse before he became a doctor, and he said, I attribute my success to the fact that I was trained to think like a woman and to think more holistically. And he had the experience of working for some labs. We're going to be talking a little bit more about labs later, but laboratories that did hormone testing. And he identified that there was not just one pattern of hormone imbalance that happened at menopause. It wasn't just that estrogen fell off. It's more than one sex hormone. There's estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. They're all affected. They all start sputtering. And he observed that there were different patterns of imbalance that could happen, that estrogen and progesterone could be adequate or deficient, and testosterone could be adequate, deficient, or excessive. But he explained something that I never came across before. And this is one of the most important messages that I want to share with everyone tonight. If you haven't heard me rant about this before, this is your big chance that we were basically lied to. Okay, I guess that's my opinion, but it's a pretty strong one. Um, it is not the case that our bodies were designed to stop producing hormones at menopause and that we were, have no other options than replacing those hormones. What I learned from Dr. Collins, and I want to make sure that you can read this here, is that during perimenopause, the ovaries, which had been producing all the sex hormones for us since we started menstruating, they gradually reduce their production of the three sex hormones. And what's supposed to happen, the way we were designed, is a process called adrenal recruitment. Our adrenal glands were designed to pick up the slack from the ovaries. And once we're not menstruating anymore, we don't need the same levels of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone that we did when we were maintaining a cycle. But we need some of them for health and comfort and other functions. There are other things that those hormones do other than, just prepare for gestation. As an important example, all three of those sex hormones protect bone. So if a woman is deficient in hormones, even if she's not having, hot flashes anymore, she may be at risk for osteoporosis if she doesn't have the levels of hormones that her body really needs. So Dr. Collins calls this situation ideal menopause. And I remember years ago, I knew some women that were older than me who had gone through menopause who didn't have menopausal symptoms. They just stopped having periods. It was the only way they knew they were in menopause. And interestingly, they were all yoga teachers. So that tipped me off a long time ago that there might be other factors, maybe some lifestyle things that went into this whole process. But this slide here is like a really, really, really important one to me. This is one of the major messages that I have, that Dr. Collins identified this opportunity that he called ideal menopause, where our body's ability, Mother Nature's backup plan, has not been messed with by toxins and stress and all that stuff. And the adrenals do, just naturally pick up the slack, and women remain healthy and comfortable. And most of us don't know and have never heard that this is the ideal and that this is available. And I can tell you that because I got myself balanced with some of the things that I've shared and will share more, I had almost this kind of menopause. Very, very few symptoms and very easily resolved. So like I said earlier, I hadn't lived in hormone hell, but I had some fairly normal, symptoms and experience. So I, can sort of validate from my own physiology that it is possible to regain that kind of balance. The body is amazing. It wants to work with us. It's not, in any way an adversary. We just, in most cases, don't know what we need to know to be able to treat it properly. So I mentioned hormones. I just wanted to clarify a little bit better what we're talking about here. That the main hormones that are, being looked at in this whole midlife transition are, as I said, the sex hormones of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And not everybody even realizes that testosterone is part of the mix, because that's, as we know, considered a male sex hormone. But women have it too, and we need it as well. And it is very much part of this mix. But the other hormones that I'm mentioning here, of cortisol and insulin and thyroid and melatonin and oxytocin, they're also kind of important to consider because we are very holistic beings and the endocrine system is very delicate. So, the you can't really impact one hormone without impacting the others. They talk to each other a lot. And the reason that I have cortisol in bold here is that is the one that is causing most of our other imbalances. And we're going to spend a fair amount of time this evening focusing on that. That is the main culprit, which is the bad news. But the good news is it's relatively easy to balance it once we realize what's going on. Insulin, which is produced by the pancreas and regulates our blood sugar, also turns out to be important because insulin and estrogen have a synergistic relationship. And oxytocin, the one at the bottom, is also kind of important because it's an antidote for cortisol. And oxytocin is the love hormone and the pleasure hormone. And there's lots of really wonderful things that we can do in our lives to increase oxytocin and automatically antidote the cortisol hormone that is otherwise causing us all these problems. So, you know, oversimplifying a little bit here, but hanging out with our girlfriends and dancing and singing is a major antidote for hormone imbalances. And I know that sounds way too simple. And I'm not saying that there's nothing else that we can do, but I think it's really important to remember, especially for those of you that I know love to dance and sing. So, moving along. Um, so when we think about what I was sharing a few minutes ago about that ideal menopause, and having a new respect for potentially for the body, which was designed to, handle this transition in a really smooth way, then we get to ask ourselves, well, what interferes with that? Because very few women in our world have that ideal situation. For some of us, it's way not ideal. And I'm just summarizing the culprits here. Um, the first One being stress that I've already mentioned, and the stress hormone cortisol being the major culprit for a couple of reasons that we're actually going to look at on a chemistry chart in a couple of minutes. Because chemistry was not my subject, but this one is like a really important concept for us to understand and master. So we're going to look at that and realize that in addition to messing with our cortisol, messing with our hormones in a in a real-time way, it's also the case that generally by the time a woman is 50, she has been stressed out for almost 50 years. And when our bodies go knocking on the door of the adrenal glands and say, "Hi, we'd like you to take on another job," most women's adrenal glands are kind of saying, take a hike. Um, I'm tapped out. I'm not prepared to take on another job at this point in my life. And that is really why most women have menopausal problems, is right there. So again, we're going to come back to that in a more constructive way. But a couple of the other contributing factors that we can also understand and have some control and some choice about is the whole concept of toxicity that I think most of us know. This is information. I'm sure we can research this, that there's many endocrine disruptors in our food. Um, for people who consume animal products, and I do, so that's not a judgment, but a lot of the foods that we consume have been treated with hormones and hormone-like substances. We're not living in a natural world any longer, unfortunately, as we all know. And that messes with our hormones as well. And the point that I'm making here about the liver and toxicity is that some of the decisions that the body makes about the way it handles our hormones, especially estrogen, and I know a lot of women have concerns about estrogen. Largely, we've been misinformed about some of the concerns about estrogen, but women have been told that, estrogen causes cancer, for example. Estrogen does contribute to growth in the body. And there are situations where there's a term that you may have heard called dirty estrogens, where our estrogen metabolites actually can be in a form that can be harmful to the body. But those decisions are actually made in the liver. So the overall state of our bodies, of how toxic we are and how healthy the liver is, have a major contribution to actually how our hormones are handled in a way that is a bit beyond my understanding. But Dr. Golda, just give you a little preview. We're doing a master class in a couple of weeks where she's going to be going into the science of this way more than we're going into it tonight. But just the point being made that toxicity of our environment and of our own bodies have another very significant impact on our hormonal balance. And then the last little section here that I'm mentioning, and this is tying back to what we spoke about a couple of minutes ago about insulin having a synergistic relationship with estrogen. My experience is that this is very blood type specific because for each of us, for each blood type, there are a handful of foods that have proteins that are problematic for us called lectins, and lectins mimic insulin. And my story that I mentioned a little earlier of how I got myself balanced when I was still menstruating, got my whole cycle balanced and all of that, so that when I actually stopped menstruating, I had very, very few problems. One of the biggest changes that I made was by eliminating certain foods that had those problems for me. And so I had the experience that there was like a huge nutritional impact from some of the choices that I made that allowed my body to function way better. These days, we would call some of these things biohacking. because biohacking is, finding better ways to manage the body. And it's kind of exciting that we now have like a different mindset about these things than we did 20 years ago. But again, this slide is another one that I think is really important for anybody that's seeking a greater understanding is like, oh, okay, in the ideal world, things would be a certain way. And now we know that that possibility is available to us. And these are the things that mess with that. So again, this is decades worth of research and understanding that I'm happy to kind of simplify and offer to you in this format. So I wanted to share a little bit more, like I said I would, about why cortisol is this big problem. And it's because there's something called the pregnenolone steal. And I'm going to show that to you in a minute. And what it means, and I started mentioning this a little while ago, is that when the body is under the kind of stress which is chronic for most of us, that we're overproducing cortisol, that literally the cortisol is using up the nutrients and precursors that we would otherwise have available to make estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. I'm oversimplifying here, but in some respect, it is that simple. And so that excess cortisol production leads both to adrenal exhaustion, that many women experience, which is why the adrenal glands are not enthusiastic about taking on the job of starting to also produce estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, when we're 50 years old. So it interferes with that adrenal recruitment process that I learned about from Dr. Collins. And cortisol also just on its own contributes to body fat and sleep disturbances and other imbalances that we often associate with menopause. So again, trying to keep the chemistry simple, but I have to show you this chart because it's so clear when you see it. So this is called the hormonal cascade, and it's one of the clearest versions of this that I've seen. And it kind of shows you like how things are made from precursors. And actually, one of the things I'm going to start with is that at the very top of that cascade is cholesterol. And that's something else that, in my opinion, we have been lied to about. And there's a lot of information that you can find that will back up my opinion. Thank you, Cecilia. But basically, cholesterol's been demonized as a bad thing because it has been correlated with, blood vessel constriction. And what we have reason to believe actually is the case, it is that it's inflammation that is the cause of that problem, and cholesterol is actually trying to be a solution of providing a solution for the blood vessels. But in any case, we need cholesterol very much as a precursor to all of these other hormones. So, men who are on statin drugs, a common side effect is erectile dysfunction. This is why. Reducing cholesterol interferes with hormone production. And in addition to the fact that statin drugs have such severe side effects, my opinion is that that is something else to question if anybody is being diagnosed with that kind of situation. But again, this is education, not medical advice, but just something to bring your awareness to. Okay. The other thing to notice is cortisol is there at the bottom line in the middle. And what this really kind of illustrates is what I was saying a few minutes ago. When the body is overproducing cortisol, it's really it's sucking all of the precursors and nutrients to produce that, because cortisol as a stress hormone is kind of geared to near-term survival. And the body puts a higher priority on that than it does reproduction when our survival is threatened. And when we're living in a constant state like this can lead to the situation that many women experience of, gee, don't have enough estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. The other thing that I find to be kind of interesting here is that progesterone is a precursor to both estrogen and testosterone. And one of the interesting and tricky things with hormone balance is that it's not just, excuse me, the level of our hormones that's important, but the ratios among them. And be, because the body has the ability to make estrogen and testosterone out of progesterone and not the other way around, um, I have felt that progesterone was a relatively safe intervention in a way that estrogen to me is much more tricky in terms of our health and our safety. And again, this is something bit above my pay grade, but that I look forward to us being more educated about. Um, but this picture that I'm showing you here, I remember the first time I saw it, it was like, oh my God, now it makes so much sense. What's going on? So the other thing I want to say about that, just on the subject of estrogen is a complicated hormone, more complicated than progesterone and testosterone. And there's three main types that are mentioned here. Estradiol is the most powerful one and the one that the body produces during our reproductive years. So it's the one that we're looking to replicate the most because estriol, which is produced during pregnancy, and estrone, that's usually the postmenopausal form of estrogen, they're weaker in effect. And again, there are concerns and a lot of misconceptions about estrogen and its safety. But as Dr. Gold and I were chatting about a little bit earlier today, some of the studies that have been used as the basis for that have been very, very flawed. Okay, you know what? I am going to just stop here for a moment. I'm going to stop the share because I have been yakking for a while. And I just want to check in and see if there's any questions or comments or anything anybody wants to comment, ask about before I continue. Dr. Golda, can I get a heck yeah? Like, yes, we're on the right track here.
I think you're doing a great job. Yeah. I think it's so important to present the reality. So thank you.
And I think the story, because there's a lot of science here. And like I said, I'm not a scientist per se. I feel like I've, learned enough to be able to make sense of it all. But there's a story here that I think it's really valuable for us to understand, and a kind of respect for our bodies that they deserve, because they're not screwing up. They're working really, really hard to support us through all of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of the things that we can do, as tweaks or deeper interventions, they're really not that hard, and they become much more obvious once we understand this language. And I just continue to be incredibly grateful that this wisdom and information was made available to me and that I get to make it available to you.
Yeah. I
And
think
hi,
it's great.
Emma. Lovely to see you. Emma's joining us from Australia, so she gets there's somebody here that's joining us from Colombia, and I told her that she wasn't going to get the prize for being the furthest to join us tonight. Okay, I'm gonna jump back in. So one of the really important principles here, and again, this is an important principle to me, it has been for a very, very long time. And in in this conversation, it was very much validated by Dr. Collins, who I studied and trained with. That's this quote is mine. One size fits all doesn't fit anyone. So I never, when I eat with a supplement, it says, take two, and call your, or consult with your health practitioner. I don't believe that anything applies to everyone. And when we're talking about hormones, this is so specific. We are so individual that the idea that, women are just still getting prescriptions. And I think Dr. Golder was telling me recently that in mainstream, most doctors are not even doing any testing at all. I'm just saying, oh, you're in menopause, you have these symptoms, here's this prescription. That goes against everything that I understand. So if we're looking to apply all of these things that we're talking about to ourselves, where do we start? And I have some perspectives here that those of you who know me know that I have, is that I start with our Ayurvedic constitutional type because that's a major aspect of describing how individual we are and how we respond to stress and all of that. I also am trained and I've been working for many years with our blood types, which again, I mentioned earlier that some of those nutritional recommendations are very blood type specific. And the foods that I stopped eating that produced, those very positive changes were unique to my blood type. They would be different recommendations for somebody else. Then menopause type is a concept that Dr. Collins developed. He has a book called Discover Your Menopause Type. And his conception, as I said earlier, there are 12 different combinations or 11 different combinations of imbalance, and then the one ideal menopause of, some ideal of a woman being so balanced that she doesn't have any of these symptoms. So we can play looking at all of those things to get a pretty good idea of what's going on for each of us individually. And then in a perfect world, we would know our own actual specific hormone levels. And that is something that for all of these years, um, I held as kind of like, wow, in a perfect world, it would be amazing if we had that information, but I really didn't know how to get it. Because although Dr. Collins and his program and the way he trained me, we worked with a lab and we did do saliva tests. They were just one test, or we actually did three, but it was over the course of a week. So it was kind of, we have 24-hour cycles. So just, taking a test at one particular time doesn't tell you everything that you could know. And I've worked with a couple of labs that, again, had different approaches, but we were kind of taking a snapshot in time, and didn't really have the ability to track, exactly what was going on throughout a day, a week, or a month. And that's one of the things that I'm very excited about in our new collaboration and what I'm learning from Dr. Golda is that she works with a lab that actually can give us this information in a very specific way. So I have been working, up until now with women based on our constitution and our blood type and our menopause type. And I've been able to help so many of us get way more balanced. Um, but I've kind of always felt like we were leaving some quality of life on the table by not being able to refine it even more. Like someone like myself, I'm lucky and grateful. I don't have any symptoms at all. I'm not at any pain point. I'm not looking for any intervention per se. But I just because I know, what I know, I can't believe there isn't like another level of vitality available to me. But I didn't know how to access it before. So just as a little bit of review, there are three different Ayurvedic constitutional types based on the elements. And we call them in Sanskrit Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and relating to the elements of air, fire, and water. And one of the implications and importances of this for tonight's conversation is that women who have a lot of fire, who we would call a Pitta constitutional type, usually have more hormone issues than the other two because Pitta rules the endocrine system. So some women are just constitutionally more disposed to hormone issues. I would say Kapha would have the least concern, Pitta the most, and Vata is just so easy to go out of balance that, they sign up for that too. And when we look at our blood types, which is easy for people to find out on their own by taking a blood test. Their Ayurvedic constitutional type, they ideally would be working with somebody like myself or Aura, who's also trained in this work, to help really understand what our specific constitution is. But one of the implications about our blood type is that women with the A blood type have the highest level of cortisol production and the highest stress response. So again, we're not all starting from the same point in terms of the bodies that we live in. Some of us really are more disposed to some of these imbalances than others. And again, that's a perspective that once we know about it, we can manage way better, including knowing which foods would be specifically problematic, because for each of us, there are. And then here, da 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 da. This is the book that I've been mentioning of Dr. Collins, Discover Your Menopause Type. I discovered this book and Dr. Collins many years ago, and we worked very closely together. Unfortunately, he passed about 5 years ago, and I missed him a lot because I really haven't had a doctor to confer with. But again, the one size fits all doesn't fit anyone. He's identified 12 different general patterns of imbalance that just I've shared this with so many women and go like, oh my God, finally somebody understands me. He coined that term ideal menopause, which is something that is theoretically available to all of us. And again, there's a different strategy for everyone. It is not one prescription. It's, not one set of rules, not one set of nutritional guidelines. We're all really, really different. And what I learned from Dr. Collins and what I have been working with all these years is that there are two important angles on determining what our hormone levels are. One of them is subjective, of just really looking at our symptoms. And I have put together some very, very detailed questionnaires that just kind of illuminate that. And again, when I've shared this with so many women, it's like, oh, I didn't realize before that all of these things are, deficient estrogen. And this constellation of symptoms is excess testosterone or excess cortisol. This is something we haven't been educated about. I often say it's a pet peeve. Remember when we were in like middle school or whatever, when they marched us into the somewhere to like see a movie about menstruation? There was no movie for this. We haven't been told anything about this transition, like really anything at all. And the cost of that in terms of quality of life for most of us can be significant. And so we've got the subjective thing to look at that, again, I've been helping women with for years. And then there's the objective side of actual testing. And as I mentioned, I have some experience with that, and I've worked with a few different labs, and mostly it's saliva that I'm familiar with because that's actually more accurate than blood tests in terms of being able to see what's unbound and available to the body. And it's really important to do both of these because there's a phenomenon called hormone resistance. Probably most of us have heard of insulin resistance. It's like, your body's making enough insulin, but the cells are unable to utilize it. That can happen with the sex hormones as well. So just looking at the subjective without the objective, you don't get the whole picture. And what I have been sharing, and this again is part of that really important major message, is that there's a difference between restoral and replacement. And most women don't know that restoral is available at all. Because again, going back to the beginning when I was sharing, we basically been told something that's not true, which is, when you go through menopause, your body stops making hormones and you either replace them or you suffer. Hardly anybody knows about Mother Nature's backup plan. Hardly anybody knows about the function that the adrenals were designed to fulfill. And now that we know that, there's the potential for restoring our hormones and not just replacing them. And anytime the body is using its own intelligence for us, to me, is way better. So we have a lot that we can do to support the body in making its own levels of hormones. There's a lot of nutrition and lifestyle hacks that I share and natural remedies that work, into herbs and essential oils and things that I've been using for years, including Dr. Collins' line of herbs. And then there is replacement, which is also sometimes indicated. And that's where we do provide supplemental hormones. And there's a term bioidentical hormone replacement. Dr. Golder was, kind of reminding us that that's kind of a bit of a misnomer, because there's almost nothing that's identical to what the body makes, but at least they're chemically the same as what the body makes, where synthetic hormones are always chemically different from what the body produces. And my understanding is that that's never the preferred way to go. Yeah, I took birth control pills years ago because I didn't know any better. But synthetic hormones can never really be processed by the body. And so, in my understanding of working with the body, that isn't what I would ever recommend. But there are times that a more bioidentical type of approach does make sense if the body's not able to produce these things on its own or if it needs a jump start. So again, restoral versus replacement. Most women don't know that restoral is even a thing, but it is. So based on what I learned from Dr. Collins, I have had what I've called a three-tiered approach all these years. That the first tier is the personalized nutrition and lifestyle upgrades that I've been mentioning based on our constitution and our blood type and our symptoms. And this would be like all natural things. And the second are remedies that would be available to us that, again, not just throwing stuff at a wall, but understanding exactly what we're seeking to balance. There are herbs and essential oils and homeopathic remedies and other things that we can use to help balance all of that. And then the third tier that I learned about from Dr. Collins was more specifically targeted nutrients and bioidentical hormonal support. But again, up until now, I didn't really have access to that. I knew that that would be the solution, but I didn't know how to measure these things or how to supply them, in a way that was really optimal and really, really targeted. So I wanted to mention a few tips because, like I said, my intention was that everybody come away from tonight having at least one tangible thing that was going to make your quality of life better than it was before you attended this evening. So I have, again, this first bullet point is in bold because it is by far the loudest, most important thing that we can focus on. And that is about reducing our cortisol production and increasing oxytocin because those go together. Because cortisol is really the biggest issue in our hormone imbalances by far. And as I said, the good news is that oxytocin is produced by anything that we experience as pleasurable, including sex and dark chocolate and hanging out with our girlfriends, which is a big plug for community, dancing and singing, cuddling up with your cat purring on your lap, anything like that that has that, really, really soothing effect on the nervous system is going to be taking us in the right direction. And one of the most powerful ways of reducing excess cortisol is a yogic breathing technique called alternate nostril breathing that I'm guessing at least some of you are familiar with. And if you're not, there's a picture of it here, and there's lots of YouTube videos that describe it. But it is a breathing process where we breathe in through one nostril and then breathe out through the other, back and forth a few times. And it has a very powerful effect on reducing cortisol. In fact, there's a doctor of Oriental medicine who is a hormone specialist. Her name is Dr. Claudia Welch. And she says in her book about balancing hormones that her number one remedy for her patients is alternate nostril breathing. And she said, if you do that for 20 minutes a day, it will take you back into balance. So while we have, some more sophisticated tools to share with you that require more of an investment, it's important to remember, as good biohackers, that the body is able to just accomplish a lot of this on its own. And I cannot say enough about alternate nostril breathing. Again, if you take one thing away from tonight, and it's just one new thing you're going to try, of anything that I've shared, that would be it. And I'm mentioning another breathing technique here, because again, breath is always available to us for free. And it's called the Shatali breath. And this one is for cooling. And I'm mentioning this because realistically, most women don't make it through this transition without any hot flashes at all. That was one of the few symptoms that I did have a long time ago. And this breath is really simple. It's just about inhaling either through a curled tongue or through your teeth. And if you try that now, I can't do the tongue thing, but I can do the teeth thing. If you just inhale through your teeth, try that with me. You'll feel that that air is cooler. I remember when I lived in New York City, I used to do this standing on the subway platform in the summer waiting for the train. But for women who are experiencing heat and hot flashes, that in the moment is something that is available to you. And it can be really cooling. Another thing that if you've spent any time with me at all, you've heard me carry on about is sesame oil, which is an Ayurvedic recommendation that is very, very effective at counteracting dryness of all types. It's a wonderful lubricant. It's really good on the skin. It helps seal in the life force. And because the symptoms of vata imbalance are the same as estrogen deficiency, sesame oil is a really good remedy for overall balancing of the body. But it's a little bit warming. So I'm offering coconut oil as another really wonderful oil that can be used topically for many things, and it's cooling. So in a hot flash environment, it may be a more appropriate choice for body care. Um, and it's also a wonderful lubricant. I remember a number of years ago, I sent out a survey to ask women what their biggest complaint was at midlife, and the biggest one was vaginal dryness. And that's one of the easier ones to address. Both of these oils are really, really good for that. For the dryness, sesame is even better. And then again, these are just a few tips to share tonight, but essential oils can be wonderful. There's research to do, and Christina has, heard me speak about this because she's a distributor for Young Living. When I was having my hot flashes 20 years ago, what I was guided to was an essential oil blend from Young Living, and I used up the bottle and I never needed to reorder it. So I was really, really lucky that I was as balanced as I was at that time in my life, because a few years earlier I was a freaking mess and I would have had a much more difficult time. But I'm really partial to essential oils. And I remember kind of questioning why that was the right solution. And I had a little voice that said, essential oils are so intelligent that they'll know how to communicate with the body really effectively. And that was my experience. So these are just a few takeaway tips for tonight that I wanted to offer for you to have something that you wanted to implement or explore immediately. There's so many other things that we have available for you. Oops, I'm just looking at the time. Okay, so wrapping up. So bottom line, balance is very much an inside job. Even though we have remedies and wonderful things to offer to you, this is not just a thing of like, what do I take to make my symptoms go away? Symptoms are a really valuable message from the body of something that is out of balance that we get to balance. And I often use the metaphor when we're talking about the hormone stuff like this, that we can either, I describe it, if we're sitting in a cold room, we have the choice of either turning on the heat or needing to wear a sweater for the rest of our lives. And there is so many good reasons to actually get ourselves balanced. There's so many other aspects of quality of life and our underlying health that can be resolved by getting all of this balanced rather than just putting band-aids on stuff. So in terms of what's available, just wanted to let you know, as I mentioned, I've been working in this field for a long time. I offer one-on-one consultations with all of the things that I was talking about that my AI partner recently suggested I call a women's midlife wellness reset consultation. And I thought that was a great idea because that is one of the things that we're able to do. So that's something that I offer. Jenny, who you met a little earlier, Jenny and I have a program that we are just about to launch called Biohacking with Ayurveda, and another one that we're working on called Biohacking Your Way Through Menopause. So there's a lot more tips and strategies and biohacking things that we're going to be going into in that program in a lot more detail than we were able to cover tonight. But again, this is so much our focus right now that we're going to be doing more events and more courses around this. As I mentioned, I'm going to ask her to chime in before we close. Dr. Golda has a company called Regeneration, and I love her quote here. She said, "It's never too late to regenerate," because even if we're way past menopause and we're not experiencing symptoms, it's unlikely, like I said about myself earlier, it's unlikely that I'm living at a completely optimal level. I'm sure there's some stuff that I've left on the table in terms of additional well-being that I didn't know how to access until now. And through that, we actually have the ability now to offer personalized hormone support with some very, very sophisticated testing that does both saliva and urine on a 24-hour circadian basis. So we can see exactly what's going on. And then her lab has the ability to develop very, very customized transdermal creams and amino acid powders to actually fill in all of those nutrients and precursors that our specific adrenal glands are lacking. This is just mind-blowing to me that I only recently learned that this is available to us, and it's blowing my mind. And as some of you know, Christina and Jenny and I have an amazing community called Davina Rising, where we're sharing about all of this stuff all of the time. Um, some of you are already members. This is another access point for getting more and more of this information. And we have a special bonus for anybody that is a member or a client of ours or will become one in the next 2 weeks. That I said earlier, Dr. Golda and I are offering a special master class in 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks from tonight on the 25th, called Optimal Hormonal Support, where she's going to take us into a much deeper dive about the things that we spoke about tonight. And we wanted to let you know about all of that. So our call to action would be if any of this is speaking to you, Please feel free to reach out to me, or if Christina invited you tonight, circle back with her. We have a lot more to offer everyone, and we look forward to doing that. And I hope that tonight was fairly complete in at least getting like, okay, now I have a picture about what's going on and can see in a way that I never did before, different choices that I might have available for myself, other than, gee, you're a woman and you get to suffer. So, um, again, Dr. Golda, I'm going to ask you to please chime in. Oh, Emma had a question or a comment first. You're on mute, hon.
Yeah, I was just wondering if this would be available in Australia, this type of testing, or there's anyone doing this in Australia. But I'd say probably not, but I'm curious.
I'm curious too.
I'll chime in. We can work in any country in the world together. And the time difference doesn't stop us because we basically can ship globally in 24 hours. So we can order the kits and go through the entire process. It's an at-home process, and then it can be sent back within 24 hours to the lab. So yes, we can work with you in Australia.
So again, I'd like to keep the recording around an hour for anybody that's going to be listening in. So I'm like to conclude shortly, but
Cecilia,
Diane, yeah, I just wanted to ask Susan if you would send us those offerings so I can look at them, those last 3 slides and what you're
absolutely
offering. Yeah,
happy to follow up.
thank you.
Always getting much better about that these days.
Yeah, and also one last question. The Discover Your Menopause type, I looked it up on Amazon. They have a option for Kindle or to read it. Is it as effective if you're listening to it? I mean, do you have to take all kinds of questionnaires and that kind of thing, or is it just, I find,
Cecilia, I think that's a personal preference. Jenny loves audiobooks. I'm
I,
somebody that likes to take notes. So
yeah,
for me, it might not be as satisfying. Um, I think that's kind of more of a personal preference.
okay, I just didn't know if there were like a questionnaire that they wanted you to fill out on a, that kind of thing.
Tell you the truth, Cecilia, I worked with Dr. Collins for a long time. And when I first discovered his book many years ago, I tracked him down and I introduced myself and I told him what I was doing. And he said he was a naturopath, so he was really open to Ayurveda and blood type science. And he said, "Oh my God," he said, "Your nutritional lifestyle recommendations are way better than what I have in this book.
Great.
They're much more specific." And I made him a promise years ago that I would get his work out in the world, and he has passed, and I still feel really strongly about that. And I'm also really grateful to have connected with Dr. Golda because she's actually taken this to a much more specific degree. The technology has evolved. So
Wonderful.
uh, I'm happy to chat with you about that, but also my bias. I worked on the questionnaire that he put together, and I think I've improved upon it. So I'd be happy to help translate that for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
um,
Christina?
no, I just wanted to mention, Cecilia, did you see it on Amazon as a hardcover book and in Kindle?
Yes, both.
They don't have Audible. Audible is the audio because I
Oh,
looked it up to see
Oh,
because I
Kindle.
usually
okay.
do audio,
I see. Right.
Audible, and I actually looked it up when Susan was speaking, and I didn't see that they have an Audible, which is an audiobook.
Thank you.
Kindle
Okay.
is just the device that you use, and it's part of Amazon, where they give you a discount to purchase,
Thank
digital.
you. I misunderstood the question. So they're both visual.
Okay.
They're both visual, yes, but just one is on a digital format, and the other one's a physical book.
I see. Thank you, Christina, for the clarity.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop the recording. so that it doesn't get too long. And I'm going to not make the mistake of